Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I am Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
In this episode, we'll discuss the moral implications of cuts to U.S. food programs, both our nation's global food aid efforts, but also our domestic hunger relief programs.
So, like us, you may be very alarmed at the shift from generosity and care for the people who are at the absolute margins in our culture, who receive subsidized health care because otherwise they'd have none, or who receive support for healthy food. To see all of that stripped away as there are literally millions of dollars of tax cuts being done for the wealthiest of this country seems to both of us as antithetical to the teacher we follow, who is Jesus. I also want to say that as we talk, we're going to talk a little bit about Catholic social teaching. And you may say, well, wait a minute, Trish and Jayme, you're independent of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, we want you to know that we profoundly love our family of origin, and we were really deeply formed by it. And so while many people in our movement think of themselves exclusively as old Catholics, people like Father Jayme and I recognize that we're formed by a very particular experience here in the United States that includes the entire trajectory of the development of Catholic social teaching, which begins with Rerum Novarum in the 19th century, and which reaches its culmination in the documents of Vatican II, which are then expounded on by our popes in the most beautiful way about the rights that people have. So this is a great example of how we are on the edge of the Catholic thinking. We do not abandon the things that we find true and beautiful and worthy in the tradition. So we will be talking a little bit about the current situation, and then we're going to circle back and talk about the imperatives of Catholic social teaching as we understand them.
Tremendous. Thank you, Reverend Trish. Let's begin with a bit of background and data on U.S. cuts to our global food aid efforts. On this planet, we have 319 million people who face acute food insecurity. Let that number sink in. 319 million people on this earth suffer from acute food insecurity. During the 6 weeks after the January 20th inauguration of U.S. President Donald J. Trump, 5,200 development programs of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, were terminated. That's 5,200 of 6,200 programs within USAID. Tech billionaire Elon Musk, who led efforts to slash programs with little oversight, said, with no supporting evidence, that USAID is, quote, a criminal organization, end quote, and should die. A statement that led Bill Gates to say in May that the world's richest man is killing the world's poorest children. The United Nations suggests that cuts to U.S. programs could amount to a death sentence for millions of people facing extreme hunger and starvation. An estimated 3 million preventable deaths, they suggest. But it was on November the 5th, last week, that I saw an article in the New Yorker that I think that we should all read, which speaks of the public man-made death that is occurring as a result of the dismantling of U.S. aid. According to that article in the New Yorker last week, the dismantling of U.S. aid has already caused 600,000 deaths in Africa, 2/3 of which are children. Again, let those numbers sink in. 600,000 deaths since the dismantling of U.S. aid in January, 2/3 of which are children. In an independent peer-reviewed analysis in The Lancet, 92 million people were saved by U.S. aid over 20 years. And so we're beginning to see the results of this policy, this foreign policy by the United States. The widespread harm is difficult to calculate, partly because the Trump administration has halted data monitoring and has dismissed all inspectors general. But this is also reminiscent, as the New Yorker article suggests, of Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward in 1958 to 1961 in China, where no mortality data was recorded during a severe hunger crisis that killed some 23 to 30 million people in China. And I just want to note before I hand it back to Reverend Trish, the ripple effects of all of this. As a result of food insecurity, we're going to see increased migration flows, destabilization, all tied to food aid reductions. Reverend Trish?
Yeah, I think we tend to think about our food aid coming from this very wealthy, food-rich country as being just, a good thing to do for them. And in fact, we need to remember it's a good thing to do for us. Building off of what Jayme just said, not only is it showing the sort of compassion and values that we associate with this country and with democracy, but it's also protecting the United States from all kinds of social collapse that is going to happen around the world as people are deprived of food and as things get more desperate. We really have been seeing this, haven't we, in Gaza, where the extremity of food scarcity has cost the lives of, tens of thousands of people. And we're also seeing in that setting the government not being willing to do the right thing and step in. Now, what has the attention of my community, and maybe it has your attention and the community, your community as well, is the fact that we have it, uh, is the fact that our SNAP program, our what we traditionally called back in the day food stamps, is threatened. So that certainly got our attention here where I live. I'm coming to you from Eden Prairie, and I imagine it did too in your area too, Father Jayme.
It does. And just to share a bit of the impact on domestic social policy at present, the USDA fundings, which were cut in March, resulted in a cut of some 1.4 million meals in the DC and Virginia area alone. Recent legislation will enact the largest ever cut to Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or food stamps, which serves 42 million Americans. That is one out of every 8 people in this nation receives SNAP benefits. And an estimated 3.5 million people are at immediate risk of losing benefits this month, including very vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, veterans, as we celebrate Veterans Day today, homeless. There are some 343,000 legal immigrants in this nation who are on food stamps. So this is affecting a lot of people. One number that I like to share is that the One Beautiful Bill Act, which was signed on July the 4th, will cut $187 billion from SNAP over the next 10 years. I served on the school board here in the Austin area, where we have 130 schools. In order to support those 130 schools, we had an annual budget of about $1.1 billion to support the 86,000 students and 11,000 employees of our 130 public schools. That was $1 billion. We're talking about cutting $187 billion from SNAP during the next 10 years. Reverend Trish?
So, Father Jayme, when you say 187 billion, 187 billion, it's almost like my mind can't even visualize the magnitude of what that is, right? It's a number that's of such magnitude, it's hard to imagine. But I can imagine if that's the cut, what it's going to mean to all the millions of people of goodwill, people working multiple jobs, moms, dads, seniors, um, what it's going to mean to them in terms of their sustenance in the time ahead. And I do want to say too that, we hear, like you mentioned, the number of legal immigrants who are on food stamps. Well, one of the things that happens in this country, it's a way of deflecting how to talk about the bigger issue, is we start diving into stereotypes and racist tropes around the numbers. So not long ago, like you, Father Jayme, I spent time on social media, building awareness of my community, building awareness of issues that matter to me. Immediately the response here in Minnesota was, oh, well, that's all list the minority groups. Well, in fact, the vast majority of people who are benefiting from SNAP are Euro-American. They're white. And if you look at the map of where SNAP is most intensely needed, which our Senator Amy Klobuchar put up on a social media post, it is the lower East Coast across the South and the Southern states where the highest percentage of people are relying on SNAP. So why would I be concerned about that? I don't have family in Arkansas or Alabama. Well, I'm living in Minnesota, where our governor recently guaranteed that there would be no change in the funding of SNAP, even if the state of Minnesota had to do it. I know that's not going to happen in the red states. They're not going to step up. They're going to be too locked into this unquestioning, unchallenging following of the White House and not intervene and not represent well to their constituencies how they could fix this if they were to choose to do that.
Yeah. So, Reverend Trish, shall we explore a bit of the principles of Catholic social
Yeah.
teaching, simply so that our listeners are able to better appreciate the context from which, or the lenses through which, we're viewing this and other moral issues? The first principle that we might look at in Catholic social teaching is the principle of human dignity, how it is that every single person on this planet is created in the image of God and has inherent dignity. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops says, quote, every person has a right to life and to the material and spiritual support required to live a truly human existence, end quote. In essence, food is a basic need. It is a right and not a privilege. Reverend Trish?
And, it is a fundamental underpinning for all kinds of other rights. So you also have a right in Catholic social teaching to healthy, productive labor. So in 2009, Pope Benedict issued a statement, Caritas in Veritate, in which he said, the right to food, like the right to water, has an important place within the pursuit of other rights. You have to be fed. You have to have potable water. It's the thing on which the other rights build. And it is a fundamental right to life. So we often talk about right to life in a really narrow band in the Catholic community. We've really kind of reduced it to the question of the unborn. But in fact, the Catholic understanding of the right to life includes the born, includes the people who are older. It includes every human person.
So well said, Reverend Trish. So, what I'm understanding is that Catholics might be able to stand up and say that this is a pro-life issue. The feeding of people, as we heard, 600,000 people in Africa already having died since January, two-thirds of which are children. This is such a pro-life issue that we're talking about here. Another
Yeah.
element of Catholic social teaching is solidarity, how it is that all of us comprise one human family, and we have a responsibility for one another that extends beyond national borders. Catholic social teaching emphasizes that we're all part of the same. We're all together in this.
Mhm.
As the Catholic Relief Services says, quote, the Church sees international humanitarian aid as essential for safeguarding human life and dignity and advancing global solidarity, end quote. And so the implications are clear. Cuts to foreign food aid programs by the United States can be viewed through the lens of failing solidarity, our withdrawing from this vision of how it is that we need to be helping and lifting up all of our siblings throughout the globe, regardless of where they are or who they are, or it's we are not expressing our global solidarity as a nation at this moment.
And many of us of a certain age will remember that word, right, from the 1970s, when there was a surge of fighting for human rights in Poland. And of course, the interesting thing about the Polish church is they were very, very influenced by Vatican II and by Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II. So solidarity, we hear that word. Maybe some people's minds go to, oh, that's, socialist. No, no, no. Solidarity is standing in faith alongside other people. So I'm going to quote, again, hardly someone who's a screaming leftist, Pope Benedict. And he says this, it's therefore necessary, and this is the gap, I think, Father Jayme, to cultivate a public conscience, like not my private issue, not the thing I talk about, over coffee with my friend, but a public conscience that looks at culture and critiques it, right? Cultivate a public conscience that considers food and access to water as universal right of all human beings without distinction or discrimination, right? So this is a powerful statement that, the rights of individuals to food and water, that's a human right, and it's grounded in the right to life.
So well said, Reverend Trish. And as you're speaking, what came to mind for me is the concept of social sin as well. This public conscience that we hear of in Pope Benedict XVI. During recent years, we've also had a different way of looking at sin. That sin is not just something that's done by an individual, but that we as peoples together as a society can be participating in a sin. And one such sin at present is this withholding of aid from people, both at a global scale, but also here domestically. So what a grave, grave social sin in which we are participating unless we stand up and decry it.
Yeah, and this whole idea about finding voice comes from our faith in God. So I will quote again, and all my friends out there who are watching this, JP2 and Benedict are not my favorite popes to quote, but they had some phenomenal things to say. Thus, we take the best of the tradition in what we're doing. Okay, so this is JP2, John Paul II, in the 90s, speaking to NGOs and international agencies at the World Summit on Nutrition. All right? In the Creator's plan, the universal destination of the Earth's goods implies that every individual has a basic right to adequate food. Every individual has a basic right to adequate food. But this is the sentence that really leaped out at me. The specter of hunger and malnutrition is truly an offense against the Creator's image in every human being. And what I love about that is this takes us right to the heart of the matter, which is, what did Jesus teach us, right? He taught us that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. We are all worthy. The divine life resonates, lives, has its being and its expression in and through us. So when we ignore Lazarus at the gate, remember that parable? When the starving, boil-ridden slave or marginalized person dies at the gate, it's almost an unforgivable sin. Now, personally, I think has a pretty broad spectrum of what God will forgive. But I think Jesus is being quite pointed in that parable. And of course, his friends are like, well, wait a minute, when did we ever see you? I don't remember seeing you, Jesus. And of course, he says, when you saw the least, you saw me. So what does that mean for us, as Catholic Christians? What does that mean when we're looking at our government? Now, remember, this is my money. It's your money, Father Jayme. It's the money of all the people who listen into this podcast. The government is us. We are the government. That's our money. We pay taxes, right? April 15th. If we don't, and chronically don't, I wouldn't be sitting in my office. So, this idea that we offend God when we do not care for other people is I mean, just stopped me dead in my tracks when I read it.
The mandate of Matthew 25, right? Whatever you do for the
Mm-hmm.
least of my people, you do for me, says Jesus. It just seems that we need to be lifting our eyes from ourselves and seeing a greater good. Which brings us to the third principle of Catholic social teaching here. In addition to human dignity and solidarity, the third principle that we might discuss in relationship to this issue is the common good. Here in these United States of America, we tend to be a more individualist society. Sociologist Gerd Hofstetter suggests that there are five elements by which cultures mainly differ, and one of that is the extent to which we are individualist versus collectivist. How much we say I and me versus how much we say we. A fascinating thing is that the English language, to my knowledge, is the only language in the world that capitalizes the first person singular, I. Think about that for a moment and just what that says about me and about the place that capital I, have in this world, whereas other languages give priority to other persons, whether that's in Chinese, they have a certain form. In Spanish, we say usted as a form of respect, putting others higher than ourselves. So it just seems that we as a nation need to be more focused on this common good. In Catholic social teaching, the common good refers to the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. We, as Catholics, need to be thinking about the common good. What is the good for all involved here, Reverend Trish?
Well, there you have the heart of the matter of the dissonance between Catholic Christian culture, and I would say this is true of a lot of Christian groups, and some of the founding tropes of this nation. So we have a great mythology here in the United States that of self-reliance. That you're going to come here, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Every person for themselves. We have like all kinds of sayings that have to do with that singularity, that lone rangerism. That's kind of part of American culture, and the truth is that in many ways we reward that, right? And particularly, I'm going to gender it. We particularly reward it in men, right? So you should be self-reliant, independent, all these other things. When Catholics came to this country, and they came very early on, right? They were here in the 1600s. But as the greater immigrant groups flowed in, particularly in the late 19th century, Catholic culture was marginalized. It was very different than the dominant culture of the United States. Catholics were othered in the same way that we now other people based on all kinds of issues and qualities that they have. So there's that tension, right? On the one hand, what are you going to follow? Are you going to follow that narrative that says that independence is what we all need? And you know what? I don't care if you're working two jobs down in Minneapolis. Get a third job and feed your kids. And that's what I'm hearing, right? Not from our members here, but um, or are we going to say no? As Christians, we are called to love, care, and see God in every single person that we meet, and that our job is to be part of a collective. And when you say that, it's like, again, people start going crazy, oh, socialism, whatever. You know, the beloved community, that beautiful phrase that emerged over the life of the church and that Martin Luther King really popularized. The beloved community is all of us in it together, all of us caring for one another. And all you need to do is open up the Acts of the Apostles. This is the founding value of the early Christians, right? And they took care of each other. They had the deacon emerges to go out and find out the needs of the community and to meet them, to take care of the widow, the orphan, the stranger. And I'm a little worried that here in the United States we have lost some of that, or surviving by insularity, like by kind of putting our heads down and saying, well, it doesn't really affect me. We're really good, without really thinking, well, it's not enough for us to be really good. The goal is for all to be really good.
It just seems that part of our American ethos or mentality is this pick yourself up by your bootstraps
Mm-hmm.
mentality, where it focuses on an individual and his or her or their efforts to pick themselves up. And so when we succeed at picking ourselves up and or we do what is necessary to support ourselves and our families, it's easy, it's tempting to look around and to see others and to ask, why are they not picking themselves up in the same way? Which brings us to the fourth element of Catholic social teaching, which might touch on this conversation of cuts to food aid, and that is the principle of the preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable. We recognize how it was that Jesus of Nazareth was not born into some wealthy family. He was born in a stable, according to the Gospel of Luke, where his parents offered two turtle doves for Mary's purification, because that was the offering of the poor. There is this belief in the scriptures, in the Hebrew scriptures, that God is on the side of the anawim, of the poor, the lonely, those who have no one to defend them, the widow, the orphan. And so part of Catholic social teaching is this belief that God stands on the side of the poor. If we are going to stand with God, we've got to be with those in need. Reverend
Mm-hmm.
Trish?
And of course that theology emerges from the global South in after the Second Vatican Council, in the great gatherings of the South American bishops who came together and began asking the fundamental questions about dominant culture and the oppressed, particularly during situations where we all know about the desaparecidos and all of the native peoples, indigenous peoples who were murdered and really crucified. And then it was in that setting that these theologies of liberation emerged. So I think we all should try to remember that those deeply held teachings that are so important to us emerged out of the communities that we now are inclined to demonize. These thousands and thousands of people who are at our southern border, fleeing crime, fleeing death threats, fleeing lack of food, fleeing climate change, which I mean, I cannot even imagine what we're going to be dealing with in 10 to 20 years. That's an issue that seems to fall off the radar constantly with the immediate crises that we're already in. It makes me think, Father Jayme, we should get Bishop Pablo Burson from the Ecumenical Catholic Communion, my bishop, to come on and share with us, because he has been going back and forth to South America as a missionary and in service for his entire career, first as a Roman Catholic religious priest, and then now as the leader of one of the Jesuit universities uh, immersion programs. I think Pablo could really offer us some insight into what those teachings gave us and why we have to keep them on our radar.
I'm just reminded, Reverend Trish, of how it is that, according to one adage, we need to when we preach, we need to hold the newspaper in one hand and the scriptures and the best of our Catholic tradition
Mm-hmm.
in the other hand. How it is that we can bring together what it is that's happening in the news and in our world with the best of our Catholic social teaching, the best of our Catholic tradition, and of scriptures. As we reflect on this issue, I'm just made to think of how it is that the withholding of food from those in need, both on a global scale and or here domestically, raises serious moral questions for those of us who call ourselves Catholic, who call ourselves Christian, who call ourselves followers of Christ. There is a moral cost to all of the humanitarian cuts that we're seeing during these days. And so, more than anything, I hope that this episode helps to shed light on that and bring attention to that we as Catholics need to stand for these principles of Catholic social teaching. Trish?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also kind of, my mind is flying since I'm big on the Gospel of Matthew. I think you are too. And I think about the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And, so here Jesus has been teaching. There's this massive number of people because it was 4,000, 5,000 men. So there are probably tons of women, children, hangers on, whatever. And the disciples get all fussy, right? Because, people are getting hungry. And let's face it, we don't get a little snarky when we're hungry. And they're like, disperse these people. They need to eat, whatever. And Jesus turns to them and says, they need not go away, right? They're not the problem. They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. You guys, give them something to eat. A totally outrageous demand, but it is phrased as a demand. It's not like, well, it would be really nice if you went out there and chatted with everybody and see who's carrying what, or, he says, come on, you're my followers. I've been teaching you. You give them something to eat. So what does that mean for all of us, right? Well, I think it goes back again. I'm such a child of the 70s, Father Jayme. So you remember that saying, think globally, act locally, right?
Right.
So we absolutely should be doing everything we can to take care of our local food shelves, for example. So I was really in action as the SNAP benefits were about to expire. Oh my gosh, wrote every pastor in town, went to our food shelf, created JPEGs for everyone to put in their bulletins, went out on social, wrote my local column about, I just did everything I could, right? So that's the local piece, right? So everyone can look in their pantry and bring something with them to their place of worship. I'm sure workplaces are doing it, or just go by your local, or you know what? They all have Amazon wish lists too. I have a little mixed relationship with Amazon, but I want people to have toilet paper and diapers, and that's usually what's on our local food shelves with wish list. So we do that. But we also have to think globally. And one of the pitfalls is, are we willing to work for systemic changes? Right? And to not see this as people of faith, like, well, Father Jayme and Pastor Trish, they'll do the visible actions or whatever, or even more so where we're more inclined as Catholics, because one part of our inheritance as, edgy Catholics is we tend to look to our bishops. That's kind of in our bone marrow, right? Because we came up in a system that's an inverted T with all the power coming down and then the laity at the bottom, right? To really own these questions. So who are you writing to? Are you writing your congresspeople? Are you writing your senators? Are you writing the office of your local bishop? Are you thinking, Catholic Charities? And we may have a chance to have a wonderful representative of Catholic Charities here. With my recollection from a while back, but I would suspect it's probably still close to accurate, is they were the largest distributor of food on the planet because the Catholic community is global. There are people everywhere, right? So you can get food out through this incredible pipeline of well, they kind of call it channel marketing, right? You get it out through all the channels to where it's needed. But don't hold yourself on the hook. But people who are watching or listening, hold yourself on the hook for influencing people with power so that we are doing the global piece, even as we are struggling to make sure that the local piece happens. Father
Yeah.
Jayme?
Well said, Reverend Trish. So, as we come to the conclusion of this episode and think of the final words that we'd like to share, what I'm thinking is that Matthew 25 gives us a clear mandate to make sure that we are feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, etc. So, these cuts to aid that we are seeing in the news are just as despicable as they are. They are a call for us to rise up and be the prophetic witnesses to gospel values in this time. It is time for us not simply to talk the talk as Catholics, as Christians, as people of goodwill. It is time for us to walk the walk, and for each of us, listening to this or not, to think about what it is that we can and will do to help bring an end to hunger and all of the suffering that is being caused here through all of this. During our seminary studies, we have various courses in ethics and in moral theology, which help us to understand what it means to be good people, good Christians, good Catholics. Now it's time to put that in action so that we might truly be the extraordinary Catholics. We are called to be the cutting edge Catholics who are not content simply to see the status quo, but who are willing to stand up and do something about it. Reverend Trish, you get the
Yeah.
final word.
Well, that passage you're talking about, Matthew 25, is a fundamental passage in Catholic moral theology. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Truly, I tell you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Central to Catholic moral theology and foundational to another thing that we Catholics like, which is the corporal works of mercy. You remember those, everybody? The corporal works of mercy. This is out of the catechism. I'm telling you, Father Jayme, people who know me are going to be cracking up with all of the documents certain types of documents that I'm quoting, but there's good stuff in there too, right? So my final word is, something from the catechism, which says, God blesses those who come to the aid of the poor and rebukes those who turn away from them. Give to him who begs from you. Do not refuse him who would borrow from you. The works of mercy are charitable actions by which we come to the aid of our neighbor in his spiritual and bodily necessities. My final word. Thanksgiving's around the corner. We're all going to be overeating. I don't know about you guys, but my groaning board truly does groan because everyone's got their favorite thing, and mom and now grandma, I make sure it's all there. When we're together, things may come up, and maybe we're going to be with people who are of a different mind about some of this. So I'd like to offer just one little piece of coaching, and it's this. And this happens with other types of Christians and with other Catholics, with inclusive Catholics, with Roman Catholics, whatever. If someone starts hooking you on who created this problem, well, it's your fault, your party's fault, or it's your party's fault, blah, blah, blah. And that rhetoric escalates and goes nowhere. I would encourage people to return in your heart to what you know about Jesus, right? We used to have those "What would Jesus do" bracelets, right? We know what Jesus would do around this one. And sometimes it's going to be saying to someone, Mom, you always said we could set an extra plate. There always was enough for one more person when I was growing up. Or, Dad, I remember how you used to make us take our lunch because mom would put together, I feel it's a little gendered, but that's my era. Mom would put together a much healthier lunch than what we could get at school. We have shared values with these folks, and the shared values come from our faith. So please don't forget that. Burn that in your heart. Speak the truth with love and see if you can find those points of commonality. I think that's going to be a heavy lift for us in the next few years, but it's going to be a super, super important one.
Well said, Reverend Trish. Reverend Trish, thank you for a robust conversation.
Oh, it's always fun to be together, Father Jayme. It's so fun to be together.
Tremendous. And also, we want to pause and simply thank our listeners as well. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Vani.
See you all the next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.